cruise industry, so please give him a big hand. Good morning. I am from KMI. My name is Hwang Jin-Hoi. What I'm going to talk about today is the challenges in cruise ship finance for the development of the Korean cruise industry. My presentation slide is in English, though most of the audiences are Korean, and I would like to ask for your understanding in advance. So these are the contents of my presentation, and the chairman, Ted Blamy, gave us a very good overview on the cruise industry trends, so I will briefly mention that. Then I'm going to talk about characteristics and necessity of the cruise ship finance, challenges, and then conclude the presentation. So let's first take a look at the global trend of the cruise industries worldwide. There are 449 cruise fleets in the world and one in Asia, so only 11%. And if you look at the segment of the cruise ships, since the Ted Blamy explained that very well, so will not be touching upon that. These vessels, they sometimes travel down to Southeast Asia, and also in Northeast Asia, aside from the two ships from the China and the Japan, there is no international cruise ships. And also by 2027, here you see the industry outlook. So the capacity will grow by 1,100. And because of the COVID crisis, you may think that the cruise industry came to a standstill. But you can see that a lot of cruise ships are well under normal operation. So this is the pre-COVID peak. And because of the COVID crisis, the number just plummeted. But then here you can see that a lot of recovery happened in year 2021. And also, so now we have the 95% of the recovery. And by 2027, it is expected that it will actually grow by 128% or show 128% recovery. So the outlook is very promising. And next is about the volume of the ship order. And you see that since 2022, the ocean cruise ships are continuously placed on order. And the value is about $650 million. So it's very expensive. And also with the 2,300 cabin. And here you see the operation trend in Northeast Asia. And you can see that in March 2022, there were a few cruise ships. But then as time went by, you can see that the number of ships in the Northeast Asia have continuously declined. And so we really need a breakthrough in order to make them return to Northeast Asia. Korea, fortunately, we opened our border, whereas China is still keeps its border closed. And a lot of cruise ships have already left the Asian market. And if you look at the source market situation in Asia, you can see the passenger volume reached its peak around 4.2 million, but then it went down significantly. But centering around the Singapore, there has been some slight increase. But in Asia, because we have a lack of ships and also we have very small scale industry here, so the growth is pretty modest, very sluggish, I guess. And also the cruise industry worldwide, you can see that except for the Northeast Asia region, a lot of operations have been recovered. But in Korea, because we don't have the flag cruise ships, and therefore we have to attract the foreign cruise ships to Korea to see the recovery of the industry. And that's actually a unique challenge that we are facing. Now let's take a look at the characteristics and necessity of the cruise ship financing. So cruise ship finance, as you may be aware, for the real estate, you borrow money based on the value of the apartment that you are going to buy as a collateral. But the ship finance is a little bit different, that the fund necessary for the acquisition of the ship with the asset value of the ship and cash flows generated from the ship as collateral. So in other words, here you can see that operating profit is actually taken in as a collateral. And also here you can see some characteristics of ship finance. So because the cruise ship is a large ship, and therefore it involves a large amount of the procurement with the long-term finance period. As you know, the general ship finance, so the collateral is calculated based on the operating profit of the cargo handling. But the cruise ship is very risky because it has to rely on the revenue from the tourism business, which could fluctuate and has a lot of variables. And again, these are the definitions and differences of the cruise ship finance. So you can see that the profit structure is a bit different from the general commercial vessels. And also in terms of the risk, it's more vulnerable. And that's why the revenue of the tourist agency doesn't really go to the shipping company directly, rather escrow account is utilized. And also here you can see that this is sort of the history. So the structure of the cruise ship finance in early stage, that was pretty basic, but nowadays we have very complicated structure for cruise ship finance. So here you can see that the private funds, own funds, bank financing, capital market, as well as the SPV, diverse ways are utilized to create the fund for shipbuilding. It's because building a ship requires a enormously high cost, and therefore one bank cannot afford all the money or all the investment that goes into the shipbuilding. And now let's take a look at the necessity of the cruise ship finance. Already the Korea's cruise law for the development and support of the cruise industry, it stipulates the necessity for the cruise ship finance. So here you can see the clause, relevant clause. So this clearly states that in order to cultivate the cruise industry, cruise ship financing is necessary. And also the government's first plan for the development of the cruise industry also stipulates that the cruise ship financing is critical to support and foster the national cruise carriers. However, although they exist in papers, none of them have actually been realized yet. So does Korea have a organization that can provide the cruise ship financing in the private sector? Nothing. And also even in the policy financing institution, again, no public organization provide the financing for the cruise ship industry. Why? Because first of all, we have very little demand. And also they provide the investment and financing only for the general shipping companies, not the cruise ship builders or the shipping companies with some special needs like cruise. So we don't really have the structures or the organization available for cruise ship financing. But why do we need that then? So why do we need to have the ship finance? Here you see the total value chain of the cruise industry, and you can see that it actually comes from the cruise ships. So cruise ships travel around the world, create the tourism markets in their destinations. And also there is shipbuilders that provide cruise ships, and it requires the building staff, maintenance staff, and so on. So without cruise ships, we cannot really expect the full-blown growth of the cruise industry. If you don't have the cruise ships, then you only have the tourism industry, but there is no virtually cruise industry. In other words, if there are no cruise ships arriving from overseas, then you would not have the cruise industry at all. So this is the situation in Latin America. But unlike them, the countries in Europe or North America, because they have their own cruise ships, and therefore they have their own stable markets for cruise industry. And therefore, in order to cultivate the cruise industry, we really have to have the cruise ship finance to build cruise ships. And here you can see the recent cruise ship building prices. So the Viking Ocean The cost is about $275 million for shipbuilding, and it can accommodate 378 passengers. So here you can see that this is excessively high and expensive. And also there is a 100 million ship with the 10,000 capacity or tonnage, Emerald. And if you look at the Dream Cruise, you see that the cost is about $1.8 billion. So here it's very clear that the private sectors cannot afford all this money to build the cruise ships. In Korea, we have the LNG carriers and also the shipping companies that make investment. And HMM recently saw the increase in the freight rate. However, when they build ships, they don't build ships with their own finance. Rather, 80% of the money comes from the government organizations or the public lending organization. And therefore, likewise, in order for cruise industry to flourish in Korea, we really have to have the government support. And for this, we have to have the public organization that provide the financing for the cruise ship building. So if you look at the container shipbuilding price, it's about $198 million on average. And LNG about $200 million. But here you see that the cruise ship is much more expensive than the LNG or the building of the general container ships. So that's why I keep mentioning that the private sectors cannot afford all these money. But if you look at the value of these vessels, you can see that the cruise ships are much higher than the container ships or the LNG carriers, like by 10 to 20 times. And therefore, from the shipbuilder's perspective, I believe that they have every reason to build cruise ships. Now, how can we provide financing then? So let's take a look at examples of the other countries. So here you see that the K-Shore and the Exim Bank in Korea, these are the relevant organizations. And also in Taiwan and Japan, we have the relevant organizations here, export credit agencies. In Germany, the Hermes, and the France, COFACE, they are the export credit agencies that provide financing for cruise ships. So the Euler, Hermes, the COFACE, they provide the policy finance for shipbuilding, but in Korea, nothing. So what I like to tell you is that the policy finance institutions, from the overseas examples, we can see that they can provide stable financing for the building of the cruise ships, and therefore they really have to step forward and provide financing to build cruise ships. Now let's take a look at some challenges to overcome. So there are some prerequisites to grow cruise ship industry. So if there is no demand, then no policy can be implemented, and therefore we first have to create the demand, and then the policy finance should be provided. But in order for that to happen, there should be the development of the cruise companies, and also a lot of things should come into play and come together. Only then we'll be able to see the growth of the cruise ship industry in Korea. And based on that, the policy finance institution should come up with the appropriate financial products to provide the sufficient investment for the building of cruise ships. So with the increasing demand, also the relevant government policies have to be divided. And therefore, I believe that the public policy and private demand, they should go hand in hand. But it should be the public policy that lead the process, and they should go first to create the demand. And so here you can see some prerequisites for the development of the cruise ship industry. So the government should first come up with a plan to secure the cruise ships. So the policy should be devised first. I think that if the government provides such an assurance that the government will be involved and provides the finance for the cruise ship, then I believe that this will be a huge momentum for the growth of the market and industry. And also, we really have to work on details like whether we are going to have, how we can have a long-term, low-interest rate financing. And also, we have to make sure that the internal assessment should be made so that we don't have to rely on external parties. And also, there should be a sufficient promotion and advertisement activities, as well as many technical details that need to be established. And also here you can see the investment profitability analysis case for the private cruise ship purchasing. So here you can see the conditions for the vessel financing and vessel operation profit as an example. Low ship price, initial investment 30% out of the ship price, repayment period 10 years, interest rate 5%. So this is actually from the Carnival's 2018, 19, and 20 operating profit data. It's based on the actual data. And I made the assumption that the profit goes up by 5% every year. And here you can see where the break-even point can happen. So in terms of the IRR and MPV, here you can see that we need some long-term perspective. Next is about the cruise ship finance in Japan. Later, Mr. Tanaka will talk about this more in detail, but in Japan, the Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Bank, they provide 60 billion Japanese yen for the cruise ship finance, or $540 million. So what we can see from this example is that even with the COVID crisis, and also when the performance was very low, and when shipbuilders suffered from sluggish business, that actually became the opportunity for Japanese bank. So they grabbed this opportunity. And also the Mitsubishi failed to build cruise ships, so they had to rely on overseas operators. So I think that it really gives us the clear lesson to Korean shipbuilders that if they cannot build cruise ships right now, then they cannot build cruise ships forever. And therefore, they really have to be proactive and make preemptive investment. Some people are saying that if Japan cannot do it, how can Korea do it? But experts say that the Korean shipbuilding industry is 10 years ahead of Japan, and therefore we really have to be proactive in this matter. And here you see the structure of the cruise ship finance. So the government can provide the senior loan, and the private sectors can provide the junior loan. And we can come up with the diverse designs of these finance structure. Or if the private sector provides the first lien senior lending, supported by the government, with the government support, I think that's another viable scenario. Now let me give you the conclusion. One of the reasons that the cruise industry is now under the supervision of the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries is because it's related with the port infrastructure. And now we have a great port. And now is the time for the ministry to come up with the policies to cultivate and foster the growth of the ships and shipping companies. And for that, the cruise ship should be an important part of the policy that they will devise. And also there must be the strong demand from the private sector. So the cruise tourism, cruise shipping, and cruise shipbuilding, when they come together, then it could lead to the various other industries. And for this, with that, Korea will emerge as a hub of the marine tourism. And in that sense, I think Korea's cruise industry is at a crossroads. And now is the time for us to decide whether we can have our own cruise ships or whether we will just simply be a port of call. So in other words, how can we secure the cruise ships and have our own cruise industry? So I think this is very important. And for this, the government and also the private sector should come up with strong will and proactive investment. And with that, thank you very much.